The kettle was already on the stove when I said it. I remember that detail because I have gone back to it so many times, the way you go back to touch a bruise just to see if it still hurts. I was 22 years old, standing at the sink with my hands in dishwater gone cold, and I said, "Not tonight, Jonas." 3 words, that was all. I did not raise my voice. I did not cross my arms or turn away dramatically the way English women do in the films I was not supposed to have seen. I said it the way you might say you were tired, because I was tired, and I turned back to the plate in my hand. He did not answer me. He did not slam a door or raise a hand or even sigh in the way that means something. He set his coffee cup down on the table, quietly, the way he set down everything, and he went to bed alone. And that quiet, that particular deliberate quiet, was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. I did not know it yet, standing there with soap on my wrists, but I had just stepped into a machine that had been built 100 years before I was born, and it was already beginning to turn. My name is Naomi. This is The Amish Wife, the channel where hidden Amish wife stories are told from the inside, by someone who lived them. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I was married at 19. I left at 25. If you are new here, welcome. I mean that. If you have been here before, thank you for coming back. Before I go further, I want to ask you something, because I ask everyone who watches. Did you grow up somewhere your body felt like it belonged to something other than yourself? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one of them, even the ones that are hard to read. And if this is the kind of story you need to hear right now, please subscribe and like this video. It helps more than you know, and it costs you nothing. Now let me take you back to the kitchen and to the years before it, so that you understand why 3 words could do what they did. In the outside world, a wife saying no to her husband is a private matter between 2 people, resolved or not resolved, forgotten by morning or worked through over time. In my community, it was never private, because nothing in my community was ever truly private. We lived under something called the Ordnung, an unwritten code, never once put down on paper in the district I grew up in, and yet everyone knew it the way you know the walls of your own house in the dark. The Ordnung did not need to be written because it lived in the air we breathed, in the way our mothers looked at us across a room, in the silence that followed certain sentences. The order of things was simple, and it was never questioned aloud. God, then the bishop, then the husband, then the wife, then the children, each one yielding to the one above. We had a word for that yielding, Gelassenheit, and we were taught it from the time we could hold a spoon. To yield was holy. To resist, even quietly, even reasonably, was called Hochmut, pride. And pride, for a woman, was the closest thing we had to an unforgivable sin. A proud man might be admired for his ambition in business. A proud woman was a crack in the foundation of the house. We were given verses for this, the way you are given tools for a job. A wife submits, a husband leads. Everyone knows. No one says it plainly, not in so many words, but it does not have an official name any more than gravity has an official name in a farmhouse. It exists the way many things in Amish life exist, assumed, absorbed, never spoken of directly, and impossible to escape once you understand it is there. I met Jonas at a Sunday singing when I was 17. He was tall and quiet, the kind of quiet that outside women mistake for gentleness, and inside women learn to read more carefully. He worked his father's dairy farm 2 miles from ours, and when he offered to drive me home in his buggy that night, my mother's face did something I did not understand until years later, a kind of relief, as if a very heavy thing had been set down. We married on a Thursday in late October, the fields already stripped bare and the air smelling like wood smoke. 300 guests. 4 hours of preaching in High German I only half followed even after a lifetime of hearing it. Roast chicken, creamed celery, 7 kinds of pie laid out on the long tables in my parents' shed. I remember thinking, in the middle of it, that I felt like a piece of good furniture being moved carefully from one house to another, cared for, admired, and entirely without a say in where I would sit. I want to be careful here, because I have learned this matters. Jonas was not cruel. He was not a monster, and I will not let anyone turn him into one in the retelling of this story, because that is not the truth, and I did not survive a lie only to build a new one. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside. He did not invent the machine. He inherited it, the way he inherited his father's hands and his grandfather's temper for cows and hardly ever for people. Our first son came within the year, the way it was expected to, and for a long while I believed I was simply living the life I had been given, the way water believes it is simply following the shape of the riverbed. The night I said no was not a special night. That is the part people outside never understand. that it was not built up to, that there was no argument before it, no cruelty that had come earlier in the evening to explain it. I was simply tired in the particular way a woman is tired after a day of canning and a baby who would not settle, and a husband who had said perhaps 6 words to me since supper. I said, "Not tonight, Jonas," and I meant nothing more by it than the words themselves. He did not raise his voice. He never did, not once in all the years I knew him, and that is exactly what I need you to understand, because it is the heart of everything I am about to tell you. There are men who use their hands. There are men who use their voices, who yell until the walls seem to lean inward. Jonas used neither. He used something far more effective, and it took me years and a woman in a small office 200 miles from that kitchen to learn what to call it. He went cold. Not angry cold, not the theatrical, slamming kind of cold you would recognize from a distance. His was a quiet withdrawal, so measured it was almost elegant. He spoke to me only of necessary things. Pass the salt, the fence is down in the north pasture, the baby needs changing. Nothing else. Not that day, not the next, not the day after that. 3 days of a silence so complete it had a temperature, and I felt the cold come into that house the way you feel a window left cracked in January, a draft you cannot locate but cannot stop feeling either. On the 4th day, my mother came to visit, unannounced, carrying a basket of bread as though that were the reason for the trip. Her hands kept moving the whole time she spoke, arranging loaves that did not need arranging, and she said without looking at me directly, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes." I did not fully understand her then. I understand her completely now. She was not scolding me, she was warning me in the only language she had ever been given to warn anyone with. 2 days after that, my husband's sister stopped by with a jar of chow chow and stayed for coffee, and the conversation moved in slow circles around what I now recognize as the same warning, dressed differently. A story about a wife 2 districts over who had made things difficult for her husband, and what had become of her, spoken in a tone so mild you would think she was discussing the weather. I did not understand yet that I was being shown a map of what happens to women who say no, drawn one careful sideways line at a time. Then, for one evening, everything changed. Jonas came home from the co-op with a bag of candy for the children and, unexpectedly, a jar of pickled beets. My favorite, though he had never once in our marriage bought them for me before. He spoke to me at supper the way he used to when we were courting, asked about my day, laughed once at something small our son did with his spoon. I remember feeling something loosen in my chest, a foolish, grateful softness, and thinking, perhaps I imagined the last week. Perhaps it was nothing at all. That single evening of warmth did more to keep me quiet than any amount of coldness could have, because it made me doubt the thing I had actually felt. I did not understand yet that the warmth was never the opposite of the cold. It was a tool built from the same box. The following Sunday, an older woman named Lydia sat beside me at the quilting frame, her needle moving in and out without pause, her eyes never once lifting to meet mine. Lydia was in her 70s, a widow, one of the few women in our district who spoke to younger wives as though we were people rather than projects. She said, while threading a new length of thread, not looking up, "They do not hit us. That is not our way. What they do is harder." Then she said one more thing, so quietly I almost missed it beneath the sound of the other women's talk. "I lost one at the end, you know, a daughter. She stopped eating the year her husband stopped speaking to her." And then she rose, gathered her scraps, and walked away, leaving me with a needle in my hand and a hole in my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my own community. I did not sleep that night. I lay beside Jonas. The coldness had ended by then, replaced by that strange, careful warmth. And I thought about Lydia's daughter, a woman I had never met and would never meet, who had died, in some slow and quiet way, of the exact silence I had felt in my own kitchen for 4 days. I understood, lying there, that my story was not new. It was not even mine, not really. It was one instance of a pattern that had been running through this community for longer than any of us had been alive, a pattern so old it had worn its own grooves into the floor of every kitchen like mine. If you have stayed with me this long, thank you. I know these stories are not easy to sit with, and I do not tell them lightly. If this is resonating with you in any way, please take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It truly helps this channel keep going and keep reaching the people who need it. Now let me tell you what happened next, because the story does not end at the quilting frame. It was only beginning to widen. 3 weeks after the quilting bee, my mother-in-law paid a visit that was different from the others, longer and accompanied, unusually, by the bishop's wife. They sat in my front room and complimented my bread and my clean windows, and somewhere in the second cup of coffee, the bishop's wife said, in the gentlest voice you can imagine, that the community had noticed some coolness between Jonas and me, and that coolness in a marriage was a burden the whole district carried, not just the two people inside it. She said it the way you might mention a leak in a roof, matter of fact, faintly concerned, entirely without malice on her face. I understood, sitting there with my own coffee going cold in my hands, that my private no had somehow become a communal problem requiring a communal solution, and that the solution being proposed, however gently, was that I stop having a no at all. It was in the weeks after that visit that I began to see something I had never let myself see clearly before. I remembered, as a child, my own mother going quiet for a stretch of days, longer than a week, the winter I was 9. I had thought at the time she was simply tired from the cold. I understood now, turning the memory over like a stone I had carried without noticing its weight, that she had likely been standing exactly where I was standing, inside the same silence, decades earlier, and that she had survived it the only way she knew how, by teaching her own daughter, without ever saying a single explicit word about it, how to fold herself small enough to never need to test it. The proverb she had brought me with her basket of bread was not cruelty. It was inheritance. She was handing me down the only tool she had ever been given. That was the moment the story changed shape for me, though I could not yet have told you so out loud. It was no longer only about Jonas, or about one cold week in a kitchen. It was about a house with no exits that had somehow been built to look, from the inside, exactly like love. The winter that followed was long, the way winters are long in Holmes County, and I spent much of it at the window watching snow gather along the fence line, thinking about very little and everything at once. There is a particular kind of watching that happens when a woman is deciding something without yet admitting to herself that she is deciding it. I hung laundry in the cold and watched Jonas's shirts freeze stiff on the line, arms outstretched like a man waiting for something, and I thought, not for the first time, about how much of my life had been organized around the shape of that man's needs, his silences, his moods, without anyone ever once asking after the shape of mine. The decision, when it finally arrived, was not dramatic. It did not come as a single lightning moment the way it might in a story told for effect. It arrived the way you know a season has changed. Not on any one day, but suddenly you look outside and understand that everything is different now than it was, and you cannot point to the exact hour it happened. I was standing at that same kitchen window in February, watching a chickadee work at a frozen sweet cake, when I understood, with a calm that surprised me more than any anger would have, that I could not spend the rest of my life apologizing for a sentence I had said only once. Leaving was not simple, and I want to be honest about that, because too many stories skip this part as though the wanting were the same as the doing. I had a son by then, not yet 2, nursing still, and there is no map for how a woman carries a nursing child out of a life like that one. There was no cash in that house that was truly mine, only egg money, hidden in a jar in the barn, folded small, counted at night by lamplight when I was certain no one else was awake. There was the matter of winter roads and buggy transport, and the terrible, specific fear of never again seeing my sisters, who I loved without complication, even inside a system I no longer trusted. I will not tell the full story of the leaving today. It belongs to a different video, and it deserves its own telling. I will say only that it took a folded suitcase, a Mennonite woman in town, whose name I will not use here to protect her privacy even now, and a walk to a phone shanty in the cold that felt, at the time, like the longest walk I had ever taken in my life, though it could not have been more than half a mile. What came after was its own kind of hard. Letters I sent home came back unopened, the same handwriting on the return address every time, never once explained. Phone calls rang into a silence that had a different quality than Jonas's silence had, flatter, more final. I saw my father once more, at a distance, in a parking lot in town, and he looked through me the way you look through a window at weather you have already decided not to go out in. My sisters crossed a street once, in Millersburg, rather than pass close enough to speak. I do not tell you this to make villains of them. I tell you this because it happened, and because pretending it did not would be its own kind of lie. Even now, years later, in an apartment 2 states from that kitchen, I catch myself doing things that make no sense until I remember where they came from. I still ask permission, quietly, in my head, before I buy something small for myself, a candle, a book, a coffee I did not strictly need. I still tense, just slightly, when a phone rings unexpectedly, some old animal part of me bracing for news that never comes anymore, because there is no one left in that house who calls. Sometimes, on a quiet street at dusk, I catch myself listening for the sound of buggy wheels that I know, rationally, cannot possibly be coming. The body remembers what the mind has already agreed to release. That took me a long time to understand, and longer to stop being ashamed of. It was a small woman in a beige office, 2 states away, who first gave me language for any of this. She had plants on her windowsill that she was clearly bad at keeping alive, and reading glasses she was always misplacing, and she listened to my story for almost 40 minutes before she said anything at all. When she finally spoke, she used words I had never once heard inside my community, not because the concepts did not exist there, but because we had no vocabulary to name what we could not be permitted to see clearly. She spoke of coercive control, she spoke of bodily autonomy, and of consent that is not truly consent once the cost of refusing it has been made unbearable. She told me that emotional withdrawal used as punishment is itself a form of control, every bit as real as a raised hand, simply harder to point to and easier for everyone else to deny. She said one thing I have carried with me every day since. The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love. I sat in that office and I cried in a way I had not let myself cry in years, because for the first time, someone had described the exact shape of the thing I had lived inside, and given it a name that was not my own fault. I do not hate the Amish. I want to say that plainly, because I know some who watch this channel expect bitterness, and I understand why, but it is not what I carry. My community gave me a work ethic that has served me every single day of my life since. It gave me sisters I still love with my whole heart, even the ones who crossed that street in Millersburg. It gave me a faith that, stripped of its weaponized parts, still shapes how I try to move through the world with some measure of humility. The system is the thing that failed me, not the people trapped inside it with me, doing mostly the only things they had ever been taught to do. Before I close, I want to say something directly to you, whoever you are, wherever you are watching this from tonight. If you grew up in a place where your body was never fully considered your own, I see you. If you have ever lain in the dark beside someone and said yes, only because you were too exhausted to survive whatever your no would cost you, I see you. If you were ever taught that being a good woman meant folding yourself smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of you large enough to refuse with, I see you. You are not weak. I need you to hear that as clearly as I am saying it. You are surviving inside a system that was built, carefully and over generations, to make sure you could never say no without paying for it. The framework was the mistake. It was never you. If any part of this story stayed with you tonight, tell me in the comments what it was. Tell me where you are watching from. And if you have your own story, one you have never told anyone, you can tell me here when you are ready. I read every single one. Please subscribe to The Amish Wife. There is so much more I have not yet said, and I would be honored to have you here when I say it. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.